Welcome to another episode of Rebuilding Faith. These are 10-minute Bible messages for people with questions and doubts. And we have made it to chapter 9 in the book of John. If you've been with us, we spent a number of weeks in chapter 8 going through an argument that Jesus had and looking at the back and forth of that. Then in chapter 9, we're going to kick it off with an event that's going to happen. And this original story is going to lead to follow-up stories as people react to what Jesus does in the passage that we're going to look at today. So this is John chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. "Rabbi," his disciples asked him, "why was this man born blind? Was it because of his sins or his parents' sins?" Now here his disciples are trying to make sense of suffering that they see in the world around them. And we are still trying to make sense of this 2,000 years later. When you see something that isn't the way it should be and you go, God, why? Why is that the case? Now, in their culture, it was assumed that a physical defect was the result of sin. But they don't know whose sin. Was it his parents? Or was it his sin? Why did this person have this affliction? What had led to this physical defect? Now, what we got to remember is no one is expecting what is going to happen. No one is expecting Jesus to heal this person. And we know that because if you fast forward a few verses, you get to chapter 9, verse 32, which says, "Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind." Like, this is not a thing that happens. This is not an option. This is not a possible outcome for this story as far as they're concerned. But Jesus seems to be looking at this entire situation different than everyone else. Verse 3, "It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins," Jesus answered. "This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world." Now, this is a fascinating exchange here. What we're talking about is a scapegoat. Who do we blame for when things go wrong? That's who they're looking for. And we do the same thing today. If something's not the way it should be, we got to blame someone. Who do we blame? This is how communities have often functioned throughout history. You pick someone to carry the weight of our collective frustration, then we all feel better. So they see this blind man. They immediately want to know whose sin caused it, not because they want to heal him or help him, because they're trying to offload their own discomfort, right? When you see these moments of suffering, it makes us uncomfortable. So they're trying to make sense of that. And we often do the same thing today. When we're uncomfortable, when things aren't right, we look to a scapegoat to offload our discomfort. But I want you to notice that Jesus refuses to play that game. He refused then, and he is still refusing to play this game today. He does not give them a scapegoat. In fact, he's going to flip this whole script, and if you keep reading, he will become the scapegoat. He will take all of the blame on himself. He's going to carry our pain, our shame, our brokenness, so that we can stop this entire cycle all together. And then we get to verse 6 where it really gets interesting. "Then Jesus spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes." Now remember, this man can hear. Okay, so he can hear Jesus spitting, and he's probably thinking, what on earth is going on? What is happening? What has got into Jesus? Imagine you're watching this and you're thinking, why would you spit on this guy? He already is, the source of all of this conversation and people are pitying him. Why would you spit and then rub that on him? Like, what is going on? What has got in to Jesus? Well, we might have an answer to this when we go back to the book of Genesis, back to the creation story, and we see how God created humankind to begin with. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 says, "Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person." So in Genesis, God created man from the dust of the ground. And here, Jesus goes back to the ground to heal him. This is not just a healing. He's creating a new man. He's doing something supernatural here. Now, this is a clear sign for those of us reading this gospel narrative that John is indicating Jesus is God. He's connecting Jesus back to creation in the Genesis account. It also shows that this man's pain was not pointless. This is going to be a story that reveals who Jesus is, and we are still telling the story thousands of years later, even today. So let me ask you this question. What if your current pain is the raw material for God's next miracle in your life? What if that thing you're going through right now is what God is going to use? God is going to transform, not because God caused it, but because God is going to do something supernatural through it. What if that will be the next miracle in your life? What if we stopped asking the question, why is this happening to me? And instead started asking, what might God do with this? That's a very different way to look at your life. And then we'll close with verse 7. Then Jesus told him, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. This is incredible. Now, if you've been with me in this series, you may go, this sounds familiar. Haven't we read this story before? This story is very similar to a story in John chapter 5, where Jesus heals another person by body of water. But that was a body of water dedicated to the Greek god Asclepius. And notably, Jesus does not have that person get into the water in order to be healed. Jesus is showing a contrast. I am not like the Greek gods. I do not need the Greek gods. I am healing you. But the pool of Siloam was a Jewish facility affiliated with the Jewish temple. So here what Jesus is doing is having this man go into the water. Jesus is connecting himself to the Jewish God as the fulfillment of what they have been looking for from this religion, from these ideas. Now, there's a whole lot of drama that follows after this in the verses that come next, and we're going to look at that in the upcoming week, so tune in for that. But here's the question I want to leave us with today. Who are you blaming right now for the pain in your life? Are you having the same tendency that they had when you feel that discomfort to say, I've got to put this on someone. I've got to blame someone. Maybe it's your spouse. And if you're honest, you're putting some blame over there. Maybe it's your boss and you've attributed so much of your situation to them. Maybe it's your parents and you haven't healed from some wounds that you had growing up. Maybe it's your political enemies. And we see this rhetoric a lot right now, that we villainize anyone who's on the opposite side of the aisle toward us. Maybe it's a group of people. And again, this is very common language. I think about how immigrants are portrayed right now. We're so quick to blame an entire group of people. And we say, this is why things are the way they are. Or maybe you're blaming yourself. I've messed up. I'm to blame here. If I could have just been better. I want to show you today that Jesus is inviting you to break out of this way of thinking. Scapegoating does not work. It never works. It has been a cycle that people have been caught in, and Jesus comes to be the ultimate scapegoat to break us free from this way of thinking. I'll see you next week on Rebuilding Faith.